What is going on, guys? In this video I'll be talking about my 10 playoff contenders going into week 9. Now last week I had 11 playoff contenders. I had North Carolina on the list. That's the only thing different about this week, because this week I only have 10 playoff contenders. We're getting closer to the end of the season. We still have a lot of playoff contenders, but it's starting to narrow down. And after this week it might go down to 9. In a couple weeks it might go down to 8, 7, 6, 5. We'll see. There's a lot of contenders this year. There's a lot of good teams, but how this is going to work is at the top of the list will be the most likely to make the playoffs, which I will do at the end of the video. So I'm going to start off with like who's least likely to make the playoffs. I'll go all the way up to who's most likely to make the playoffs. I have 10 teams. Now, before I get into this video, if you've enjoyed my content, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, comment if you have anything interesting to say. I'd very well enjoy if you guys could give some feedback on my videos. Like, if you guys have anything to say on my videos that will help me grow, then be sure to leave a comment. If not, just like the video, subscribe. And if you don't like the video, well, nothing I can do. But starting off with my 10th playoff contender at the bottom of the list, who I think is least likely to make the playoffs, I have Penn State. Now, Penn State, they're my last playoff contender because they haven't really done much this year. I mean, they've been dominant. They've won a lot of games by a lot of points, but their schedule's been bad, and they just lost to Ohio State, and they still got Michigan, which is basically their last tough game of the season, and they will probably lose that. Penn State, they lack on the offense of talent. They don't have a lot of offense of talent. They don't make big plays. Penn State, I don't see a path for making the playoffs. Definitely playing Michigan, but I still gotta put them as a playoff contender, because if they do beat Michigan somehow, maybe there's a shot of them making it. But that loss to Ohio State, it kind of hurt them, because they don't really have any other games outside the Big Ten against Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, they do play Maryland. That's not going to be an easy game, but they're not a ranked team. So, Penn State, they're my last playoff contender, but they're definitely not out of the picture. I'd still say they're in the picture, but they're pretty close to being out of the picture for me. Definitely if they get another loss. Definitely if they lose to Michigan. 2 losses, they're not making it. My 9th playoff contender, who I have near the bottom of the list, is Alabama. Now, I would have them higher in another year, but there's just so many teams with shots at making the playoffs. There's so many good teams. Alabama only has a couple tough games left, and if they win out, they are in. Like, it's guaranteed. Well, I want to say it's guaranteed, but like, I'd say 99.9% chance they're in if they win out, unless there's complete chaos and like the 4 other conferences go undefeated. Florida State, Washington, Michigan, Oklahoma. If somehow all those teams go undefeated, Alabama probably wouldn't be in, but what's the chances of that happening? Alabama, they already beat Ole Miss. They already beat, who they play this week? Brain, what are you doing? They played Tennessee. They outscored them 27-0 in the second half. Now, Alabama, they still have a good shot at Georgia. I think they have a big chance of beating Georgia, definitely with the Brock Bowers injury. I don't know how long he's going to be out, but Georgia definitely has weaknesses this year. And if Bama can win out and beat Georgia, which there's definitely a shot, I'd say they're in. I think they have a way bigger chance than Penn State at making the playoffs. Like, the distance between Alabama and Penn State, I think it's pretty high. Penn State's pretty close to being outside of the playoff picture, but they're still in. But like, these top 9 teams have way bigger shots than Penn State does. Number 8, for my 8th playoff team, I have Texas. I have Texas lower because they have a chance of losing another game before the Big 12 championship. Definitely after that Quinn Ewers injury. They also still have to play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, assuming they make it. Because, like, they're not guaranteed to make it. Big 12, I know they don't have any top 25 teams, but there's still competition. The Big 12 teams, they can definitely compete with Texas and Oklahoma if they play their A game. I don't count them out. The Big 12 is not a terrible conference. It just doesn't have a lot of top teams other than Texas and Oklahoma. At my next spot, I have number 7, Washington, in my playoff contenders. Even if they take one loss, they can make it, as long as they beat the Ducks. But they really do have a brutal schedule left. So does Oregon. So does all of the Pac-12, really. And they have some concerns after that ASU game against Arizona State. I don't know why I said ASU. Against Arizona State, they definitely have some concerns. But, I mean, what happens if they go 12-0 and lose to the Ducks? Which is, I think that's highly possible. Like, I think the Ducks have a big shot at winning that rematch. Would Washington be in? There's a chance. I'd say it's kind of 50-50 if Washington goes 12-1, losing to Oregon. Because they only have one loss on the season. They have a tough schedule, and it's in the Pac-12 championship game. You'd think they deserve a spot. With how good the teams are this year, and how good their resumes are going to be, if there's not a little bit of chaos, Washington probably won't make it in. Oregon would make it over them. It's going to be hard to get 2 Pac-12 teams in, but it is likely. At my next playoff contender, number 6, I have Oregon. Now, a lot of people may question why I have Oregon over Washington, and I know I'm an Oregon fan. I'm not being biased. I'm trying to keep my bias out of it. I'm not trying to be biased towards any teams. I'm just thinking my mind, thinking what's realistic. But if they win out, I think they will beat Washington, because it's hard to beat a team twice. And Washington, they had that game at home. They played a spectacular game. The Ducks had a couple 4th downs where they missed. Like, there's so many scenarios where Oregon could have won that game, but can't say what if, because Washington won that game. But Oregon, if they win out, they're gonna have another shot at Washington, and they are highly likely to win that game. It will be a close game, just like before, but it could be flip-flop where Oregon wins by a field goal this time. It will also be an easier atmosphere for the Ducks, being they aren't playing in Husky Stadium. So, we'll have to see how Oregon does. I don't have them in my top 5 playoff contenders because the Pac-12 is freaking loaded. But who I do have in my top 5, at number 5, I got Oklahoma. They still have some tough games coming up, but they're still undefeated, and they're going to be favorites in all the games. Probably double-digit favorites in all their games. But kind of the same thing with Washington. It's hard to beat a team twice. Can Oklahoma beat Texas twice? And if Oklahoma does lose to Texas in the Big 12 championship game and they're 12-1, I'd say the Big 12 is less likely of getting 2 teams in than the Pac-12 is. So it's going to be even harder for Oklahoma to make the playoffs than Washington if they were to go 12-1, losing in the conference championship. Oklahoma, they definitely have a big shot at making it. They don't have as tough as the schedule as the Pac-12 does, but these next games, they're going to be tough. They're not going to be easy. And playing Texas, again, that's going to be tough. Number 4, these top 4 teams. I think a lot of people have these top 4 teams like in their actual playoff picture as the 4 teams to make it. And it's kind of what I'm thinking. But I'm not just putting 4 teams in a playoff picture. I'm like looking at all the teams in different scenarios, because really there could be so many different scenarios that you could look at. But I think a lot of people have Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State in their top 4. But number 4, Florida State, they control their own destiny. They have a couple decent matchups against Miami and Florida, and they will also still have to play the ACC championship game. But they've got their tough games out of the way for the most part. They beat Clemson, they beat Florida State, and last week they beat Duke. And I will say, Florida State kind of got lucky in that game. Well, I don't want to say lucky, that might be going too far, but Duke, Riley Leonard got hurt. It was 20-17 going into the 4th quarter. Riley Leonard, after he got hurt, Florida State just took a huge lead. They outscored him 21-0. What happens if Riley Leonard gets hurt? Or doesn't get hurt? What happens if Riley Leonard doesn't get hurt? I think Florida State still wins that game probably, but it would not be a 2-touchdown game. It would probably be within 1 score, maybe 27-24 Florida State winning. But it's really hard to say, being what happened with Riley Leonard. There's a what if in that scenario. But Florida State, they're definitely a top playoff contender. And on to my next team, my third playoff contender, Ohio State. I have Ohio State because they beat Penn State and Notre Dame. Even with the loss to Michigan, they're going to have a shot at making the playoffs as a 4 seed. Because they got their tough games out of the way, other than Michigan. And if they beat Michigan, they're almost like a lock for the playoffs. They're like a 95% lock for the playoffs, being they don't choke up in other games. And even if they lose the Big Ten championship game, they'd probably be in. Kind of like with Washington being 12-1, playing a tough schedule. Ohio State's played a tough schedule. But I keep saying it's hard to say, because it really is hard to say with all these teams. There's so many good teams this year. You got Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, Texas. 8 teams that are highly favorited to make the playoffs. All they have to do is win out and they're in, right? But you also got Alabama. They're a sleeper playoff pick. They're starting to rise up. Playoff picture's crazy. People don't know what to think about how the playoffs are going to turn out this year. This year would be perfect for a 12-team playoff. It would literally be perfect. I wish they could just do a 12-team playoff and just switch up everything they're doing this season, but that's not how it works. But Ohio State, they definitely have a big shot at making the playoffs, even with the loss to Michigan. At number 2, I have Michigan. They still have Penn State and Ohio State, but they're 8-0. They're very close to locking themselves as contenders. They played more games than most people have, or most teams have this season. A lot of teams have played 7 games. So Michigan, 8-0. They got Penn State and Ohio State still. They also have Maryland. I mean, Maryland, don't count them out. I don't think they're going to upset any of them, but don't count them out. They're one of the better teams of the Big Ten outside of the Big 3. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. So Michigan, if they make the Big Ten championship, I don't see them losing. And even with one loss, kind of similar to Ohio State, they would probably have a shot at making it. But on the other hand, they probably wouldn't have a bigger shot of making it with one loss as Ohio State does, because Ohio State played a way tougher schedule than Michigan. And on to my number 1 playoff contender. What do I expect to say? What does anybody expect me to say? Georgia. Easy schedule all year. They have a couple tough matchups coming up. Tennessee, Ole Miss, playing at Florida. But they should be able to win out and get in. But with one loss, like, there's questions if they get one loss. They might not make it. Like other years, one loss team is in. If you go undefeated, lose in the conference championship, a one-loss team is in if you're in a Power 5 conference. Definitely the SEC, but this year's different. This year's very different. Conferences like the Pac-12 and ACC are getting more recognition. And there's a lot of more teams rising up that did not do as good last year. But Georgia, they're my number 1 playoff contender. They're back-to-back national titles. Back-to-back national champions. Better way to put it. But they weren't number 1 in my rankings because they do not look like the best team in college football right now. But in my eyes, they're still the best playoff lock, just by the way their schedule is, and by the way their last 2 seasons have gone. I have them as my playoff lock, my number 1 playoff lock. So Georgia, I don't want to say playoff lock because they're definitely not locked for the playoffs. Nobody is locked for the playoffs. That's just how it is this year. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Tune in for my next videos. I'm going to be posting a lot more. Already onto it. So like the video, subscribe, comment, do anything that helps, and peace out, guys.